S'il vous plaît.
Okay, we are now recording, so if you want to repeat the Kesson thing.
I was saying welcome, everyone. We have, if you're following along with Rabbi Mendel Kesson, either through the Podbean app or through his Torah learning channel on YouTube, we're up to, this is going to be corresponding to his shiurim numbered 59 through 61. And so, very, very awesome teachings. So again, welcome everyone. We're in 1.4.8. We're going to go back just a little bit to reiterate some of the ideas and kind of end the chapter and get into chapter 1.5, which is the spiritual realm. So, Tovia will be back in a moment. I've lost my support team as he is out tending to the animals. Could you post page 69? Maybe I should go back. I don't want to go too much back. If you go in 67, we're going to just really quickly. There you go, one more. There you are. So he got into this idea of this is an idea, man's responsibility in engaging in this world now. He got into the idea of observance of Hashem's commandments or his mitzvot. And the purpose of the service is to create a constant state of awareness of Hashem. And kind of talked about last week how it's a very difficult level to obtain, to be doing everything in the mindset of connecting, i.e. serving God. And he kind of gets into the idea here in 1.4.7 is choice. How do we, everything we do is in two categories. We have commandments and necessity. He gets into this idea of we have divine commandments that we're to fulfill, and we have things that are necessary for us to do. Talks about these ideas of the divine commandments, to obey them, to fulfill Hashem's image, to conform to his image, to concede to Hashem's will. And the other aspect is utilizing the physical world in the way that it's meant to be intended, that was intended by Hashem. And so you have the two aspects of man, his spiritual self, and the commandments that deal with how to interrelate to your soul, like the care and maintenance of your spiritual soul, and then the proper care and maintenance of your nefesh, your physical aspect. And to put it so, simply. And so these two aspects are come together in the form of the entirety of the Torah, the commandments. So we're getting into 1.4.8. So these concepts of love and fear of Hashem, and I'm going to read a little bit to get myself into this mindset because I'm kind of all over the place at this moment. But so following in 1.8, could you turn to 69, Tovi? Thank you. Thank you so much. One of the things that one must drink. Okay. Take 3. One of the things that one must strengthen within himself is his love and fear of God. He should consider the unimaginable loftiness of God and the great lowliness of man, and humble himself before God, standing in awe before his greatness. He should then yearn and desire to be among those who serve him, to exult in his praise, and to be exalted by his greatness. Page 71. The love and fear of God are powerful means which draw an individual close to God. They enlighten the physical darkness in man, cause his soul to radiate in all its brightness, and thus elevate him step by step until he attains a state of closeness to God. So, pull up my notes here. So getting into some basic definition of terms here. What does it mean to love and fear God? And what are the elements within mankind and creation that act on those, that we can, compel us to be drawn to either one? And how do we manifest those attributes? So in regards to the Torah, there's this idea of 6 constant mitzvot. And one of the, well, 2 of the 6 constant mitzvot are to love Hashem and to fear Hashem. So starting with the fear of Hashem, asking what does that mean? We have briefly discussed this idea of the nefesh of man, which is this animal soul. It's a necessary aspect of man, and it's there to compel us to eat, to drink, to be engaged in the physical pursuits of life for the maintenance of the body. But the end of this physical pursuit is, as he alluded to in in 1.4.7, is the care and maintenance of the body, so that the neshama, the spiritual aspect of the soul, has an ability to act in the physical world. So the body is meant to be this vehicle to allow for the spiritual aspects of man to have an influence and an effect in this world, to perform mitzvot, to engage in physicality, and therefore earn good for itself, and engage in this process of transforming the physical into a spiritual components that it was initially created. So we've talked a lot about the idea of this Yetzer Tov, which is this inclination to do good, and the idea of the Yetzer Ra, the inclination to do evil or bad. These are the compelling forces that draw us towards either action. So kind of putting a different dimension on those concepts tonight, and kind of saying, instead of doing the urge for pure evil and the urge for pure good, to think about them more like the urge to cling and the expansiveness to give, and the urge for control. So one aspect of the Yetzer Tov is this idea of giving freely, of drawing close, of nearness. And then the aspect of the Yetzer Ra would be this need for boundaries, control, setting limits, to try and to get the upper hand, however this manifests in your day-to-day life. And the idea is that these are necessary components. I mean, you have to have boundaries, you have to have the ability to set limits and to set distinct relationships and in daily life. So that's a very important aspect of interrelationship in this world. And so is this idea of wanting to give love, to serve, to be a part of, and that's a very important aspect too. So, but these urges can be twisted and can be corrupted and can be used against us by this evil realm. So getting to the very basic ideas, back to the idea of the love and fear of God. So there's different levels of fear and there's different levels of love. So man is unique, and he's going to be reiterating that again and again throughout this, throughout his the Derech Hashem, in that we have the physical component and a spiritual component, and we're unique in creation in that regard. And in that dichotomy of relationship between our physical body and our spiritual soul, there's a lot of tension. And out of this tension comes this sense of self-preservation, sense of self, sense of separation, sense of will. And so this becomes the basis, the foundation for fear, the idea of self-preservation. It's a very important aspect. If we're talking back again to the idea of the nefesh here, this is the animal aspect of mankind. This, manifests in the physical, in the brain of man, is something called the amygdala, called like the reptilian brain, the brain that's ability to even not consciously just take appraisal of a situation, to take stock of any threats, to mitigate to come up with a response. It's the aspect of ourselves where we get a good vibe, or a good first impression, or a not so good impression of people that we meet on the street, or when we're getting ourselves into a situation that's that part of the brain that sets off alarm bells saying, this might not be the safest place for you to be right now. Sometimes we don't even have a conscious connection to that feeling, but it's there. And that in a lot of the writings of Chazal is related to the nefesh, this animal aspect of the soul. And it's not only the aspect that draws us into the physical world, but also gives us this idea of annihilation, of danger, of the ability to be eradicated or harmed. And so going into the fear of Hashem, what does it mean to fear God? What is the motivation? This is an important aspect of understanding fear. And in regards to the motivation, the lowest level of this manifestation of fear is the fear of destruction, of being annihilated, a fear of death now in this new physical world that we live in, a fear of damage, of harm. So in regards to the commandments of Hashem, you can see that there are punishments. And so one of the ways that man can be drawn close to Hashem and to serve Hashem is through this lower level of fear, which is the fear of not facing negative consequences, of avoiding the repercussions of bad actions. It's not necessarily motivated out of pure love. It's a motivation out of pure self, and that is for self-preservation and self-protection. Let me see here if there's any questions at the point. If you have any questions at all, please just raise them. And go ahead. Okay, sorry, I thought somebody was speaking up. So going back to this idea of fear, we have this lower level of fear, which is a motivation to acquiesce our actions out of fear of harm to ourselves, out of self-preservation. And then we have this higher sense of fear, meaning that, and it kind of alluded to it last week, is a sense of awe in, like, seeing a beautiful sunrise, this understanding your place in the world, in creation, and in relationship to Hashem, and the fear of being small. And my way I think of this is when I was 8 years old, I saved up my money and I got a telescope for the very first time. I was so excited, and I lived in the Midwest, and it was a beautiful, clear, cold January night. And there was a full moon, and I took out my telescope and I looked at the moon for the first time. I'd seen pictures of it. I mean, I was obsessed with astronomy at the time. And as I looked through the moon, I just got this overwhelming sense of fear and it was just this primal, like, I'm so small in this universe, just the enormity of the universe, how tiny I was, how brief my life would be in the complex, billions and billions of years old of the universe, just kind of hit me at that point. And I was I'd say I was closer to 10 actually. And I was just completely overwhelmed, and I had to put the telescope away for a long time. And this is the kind of awe, not out of a sense of I don't belong here, I shouldn't exist, but understanding that your presence here is a choice that Hashem made, that your creation is not by accident, but it's by design. And so that fear is that you realize just how lowly you are and how small you are, yet the creator of the universe, the master of everything, chose to make you and wants to have a relationship to you. But this higher fear can be a block as well, because we still have this need for self-preservation. It's an important aspect that keeps us alive in this world, but it acts against us in regards to the spiritual realm. And this is one of the manifestations of this damage caused by Adam and Eve when they sinned, is this being drawn into the pursuit of self-preservation, keeping, now you have to be engaged in the physical world in a way that wasn't intended before. You have to have a job. There's no miraculous support. You don't get man in the desert, and the trees don't magically bloom every day for you to have fruits and everything you need. You have to go out and provide for yourself. The world can be a dangerous place, and you have to provide for your own safety and the safety of your loved ones. And so that's part of the curse that we have to overcome. So now there's this extra effort, this really almost counteracting the intuition that you need to survive in this world. It's almost counterintuitive to get to this highest level. We've talked a lot about the point of creation. The reason that Hashem made mankind is to be a recipient of his good, to be the one that receives his a relationship with the Creator. And this is done through conforming into the image of Hashem, by cleaving close to him. Talked about spiritual closeness means similarity. And the more similar you become to Hashem, the more like you are to him and his manifest attributes in this world, then the closer you are spiritually to him. But that also means something really important, is you have to kind of annihilate and eradicate these aspects of your own self that make you unique. And that process is different to every person here. You know, what we have to overcome to get to that point, the parts of ourself that maybe we hold in esteem, or the parts of us that we utilize to form this protection in this world, the way that we interact with our fellow man can become, and they're important for survival in the physical world, but they can become extreme barriers in the spiritual sense. And so this higher fear of Hashem to be truly manifested is done through changing who you are and conforming to God. So almost kind of destroying yourself in a way. So that gets us to the idea of love. And what is love? How is it manifested? Yeah, there's a lower form of love that's talked about. And this is the love that, you know, you want to make somebody proud. You have a desire and an urge to get their approval. And that means that, you know, like kind of like a parent and a child relationship, or you know, you get the approval. There's a higher form of love, and this is a lot. This is you see this a lot in the Psalms and like Shir Shirim. This is a relationship where you desire, almost, you know, it's a desire. It's almost, a lot of the language used is kind of a romantic kind of love, that you want nothing but to be with Hashem. You want absolutely nothing more. You desire a relationship, not because you're going to get praised, not because you're going to get a girl or a boy, but because you just want to be with Hashem for the sake of being near him. You do anything to get near him. And this is that love, that higher love, that's very important. So in regards to cleaving and becoming like Hashem, because of the physicality of this world, we have a great urge. So the battle is even harder. It's like I talked about last week. I liken it to this idea of going from a nice hike out in the woods to climbing Mount Everest. That by necessity we're engaged in this world, and this nefesh that we have that compels us to take care of ourselves also is a weakness to be used by the Yetzer Hara, which is this compelling force to have control in a world where we know we don't have any control, but to try to organize things and try to make sense out of these other aspects of ourselves that seem to act in opposition. And that is the force of the neshama, which is manifest through a desire of service, to connect, to love, to receive love. This is the Yetzer Tov. So, I'm sorry, my notes are a little bit scattered, so my thoughts are too. So getting into some of the ideas, there's 7 levels of serving Hashem. And this first one is, he's talking about is chesed, this pure love of Hashem. And then this next level was something called gevura, which is this awe and fear of God, the sense of knowing where you are in this place, in this universe. The next level is called tiferet, which is beauty. And this is the realization that God has compassion towards us and desires us. Netzach is this idea of this eternity, overcoming our obstacles of serving Hashem, even if it's our own sense of ego and self. Chod is this glory of Hashem, and that kind of demanding that we, even when we drift away and we don't feel like doing something, that we remind ourselves of Hashem's awe, and that we do it even though we don't completely feel like we should. The next level is called Yesod, which is, it's not a feeling, but it's really using every aspect of ourselves. The physical emotions are compelling force to take care of ourselves, to be loved, all of our emotions, love and fear, and combining those together to truly connect to Hashem and serve him. And then that last level is called Malchut, which is kingship. And this is actively making a conscious decision with absolute humility to become subservient to the will of Hashem. And that can become manifest in us through service. And then gets into the idea, if we're serving Hashem, how do we do that? And the other point I didn't make very clear, I think I neglected in my notes, is the idea of when these two forces act together, this idea of letting go versus a need for control. One of the dangers, one of the traps of this world that the wrong call kind of develops later on in Derech Hashem, but I want to bring highlight to now, is this idea of complacency. When you have these two forces pulling in opposite directions, sometimes this idea is that people just kind of become frozen. And when you battle, trying to put it into a good wording, but basically the idea is we can see pure evil in this world, and we can kind of perceive pure good. I think we're pretty good. Most people are pretty good at that. The problem is that in between, that mixed realm of, we don't know if it's good, we don't know if it's bad, even in ourselves. So the true danger, I mean, you can look at it and you say the real danger of this whole system isn't necessarily going completely evil, which is obviously not good, or going completely bad. It's where most of us fall into, and I think I talked a bit about that, the idea of this bell curve. Most people are not innately evil, 100% evil all the time. Most people are not doing everything in their world and everything that they do, every thought, every action, every deed, in the service of Hashem with the intention of serving him in everything. Most of us fall in the middle. And so the real danger that you get here is complacency, depression, these emotions that cause us to not act. We're not acting towards good, and we're definitely not falling away towards evil. We're just kind of meh, we're there, we're existing, we're not really doing either thing. So because Hashem, who created us, wants us to be able to utilize this world in the way that was meant to be, which is to utilize it as tools to repair those aspects of ourselves, to keep us engaged. He's not going to command us to do things that are impossible or beyond our means, and he's also not going to leave us abandoned and orphaned in the world without the tools to correct the state that we're in. And so this idea of how do you obtain this state of utilizing the physical world in the way that it was meant to be? How do you care for your soul and keep it from damage? And how do you create this state of consciousness in your mind where everything you do is going to be in the service of Hashem, to become close to Hashem, to subject your sense of self to him? This is the intent of the commandments. And there are some aspects of the commandments that we, as you can see, that, obviously deal with the physical aspects of life: eating, drinking, procreation, interrelationship. And the other thing is, some of them don't even have, if you want to look in a practical way, like the laws of ritual impurity don't make much sense. If you look at them just from a practical way, then it's a thunderstorm. So if my animals completely panic, that is why. I'm unplugged. Sorry, I just didn't want to get zapped, God forbid, so I'm unplugged. Yeah, sorry. So the idea is that the commandments of the Torah are not meant to just be completely practical, that they are going to encompass every aspect of mankind's existence in this new fallen world. This world that has Zahama, that has impurity, that has Tuma, which is this world of impurity, this world of, trying to think of the translation, corruption. That how do you manage in this new world, in this new state? And so that gets us into 1.49, which is, I will read, page 71. God granted us one particular means that can bring man close to God more than anything else. This is the study of his revealed Torah. Such study accomplishes this in two ways. First, through the reading of the Torah, and secondly, through its comprehension. In his love, God composed a volume of words decreed by his wisdom and bestowed it upon us. This is the Torah, and later the works of the prophets making up the Bible as we know it. These words have the unique property of causing one who reads them to incorporate in himself the highest excellence and greatest perfection. The only condition is that they be read with holiness and purity and with the proper intent of fulfilling God's will. Similarly, when one strives to understand these works, either through his intellect or through the explanations provided in their commentaries, he can earn even greater perfection according to his effort. This is even more true when one attains a grasp of the secrets and mysteries contained in these works, since each of these concepts that one understands fixes and integrates a certain degree of the highest levels of excellence and perfection in his soul. Through all these acts, man not only earns excellence and perfection for himself, but he also elevates and perfects the entire fabric of creation. This is particularly true in the case of the study of the Torah. So, sorry for the dog. Oh, yes, Bella. So Rob asks, so some of the questions here for continue on. My dogs, if you hear them barking in the background, my little dog is not, she wants to attack the thunder and she doesn't understand. So sorry. One moment, I'm gonna mute myself, see if I can catch. Come. Lily, come. Come. I'm on the air. Sorry. So sorry. It seems like every week there's something different. Now it's my dog panicking due to the thunder in the background and the lightning. So going on to this idea of hot or cold or Matzora. How do we get hot or cold? I can't hear you. Let's see if I can find
The question's posted above that. How do we get hot or cold? And the verse that came to my mind, kind of off track a little bit, but it's Revelation 3:15, where he says, "I rather you were hot or cold, but because you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth." There's a few things in the Torah that talk about that intermediary state. You linked it to being complacent and depression and everything too, so that's interesting. And the teaching on the Metzora, which is the leper in the Torah, which is not really a leper, but the one that has to be examined by the priest, is that obviously if you don't have it, you're clean, but it also says if you're completely covered in it, you're clean. It's that stage where you've got it and you're not, you're still like in the midst of having it that is the bad stage. So it's just an interesting comparison, how that might all relate.
So the reason that this is really a few places I've seen it referred to, this complacency, depression, frozen, getting in action, lethargy, Slavic, they call it laziness or sloth. These all, this idea of however it's manifested in a particular person's life is, if we perceive pure evil, we'll be called to action. If we perceive pure good, a lot of us are drawn to that and will be drawn to action. So the true danger of the world is falling into this middle realm of being torn between these two actions and taking not making a decision, kind of sitting on the fence. And so the idea of the world that we're in and is to engage us at all levels. So the point of the Torah is to engage us at every aspect of life so we don't fall into this level of complacency, that instead of being frozen and not knowing what to do, or God forbid, what happens for a lot of people is we still have this compulsion. So the Shama, this holy aspect of mankind, is still drawn to our Creator. And how that manifests is very important. And that's why the Torah was given. The Torah was given to allow the spiritual aspects of man to be manifested in this world in a holy way, to utilize that power of wanting to return to its source, which is to God, in transforming this physical, corrupt, dark, coarse world back into its spiritual components, is the Torah. That's the mechanism that's how we do that. And it's the proper way for this desire, this urge to serve, this urge to connect, this urge to have spirituality in our life. This is the proper way for us to manifest those urges. And sometimes in lieu of that, people will replace those, will fulfill those urges in other ways, through artistic means, through philosophy. And not that those don't have a place in the world, but the true avenue, the true venue for these actions to be played out is through the Torah, and it's through the keeping of these commandments, because it engages mankind in the world and in the state that we're in a way to draw us out of complacency and make us conform us to Hashem's image, to cause us to grow, to do the repair that we were called to do, and to have a relationship with our Creator through conforming our will to His. And even says that these different aspects of the commands affect different aspects of our life. They affect the nefesh. They affect every aspect of our soul. And so this is what the commandments are called to do, to keep us from falling into that complacent state. And you see, every time they doubted or they turned around, or Israel in their trek through Har Sinai, through the desert of Sinai, they kind of you see they face the consequences for falling into this complacent state. So he says, through all these acts, man not only earns his excellence and perfection for himself, but he also elevates and perfects the entire fabric of creation. And this is very important, because the world is broken. If something's broken, we need the repair manual. And as we don't have this interconnectivity to the spiritual realm that we had before, we're kind of become blind and groping in this dark world for a way out. Hashem, in His mercy, gave us the tools and the avenue, in the methods and ways to correct and repair this world in the way that it was meant to be. So, going on into 10. Every state in which an individual exists, whether it be one of darkness or enlightenment, is a result of either the presence or absence of God's light. When anything is illuminated by God's presence, its purity and perfection are increased according to the degree of this illumination. The opposite is true when His light is concealed. God does not withhold His good, and therefore, when a person draws close to God, he is continuously enlightened by Him. It is only when an individual does not bring himself close to God that he is deprived of His light. The deprivation, however, is due to the recipient and not to God. The highest wisdom decreed that every act of observing God's commandments should bring a person closer to God in a particular determined degree. The individual then attains a degree of God's light corresponding to this degree of closeness, and this in turn causes a degree of perfection resulting from that enlightenment to become an integral part of him. The opposite is true of sin. Every sinful act removes an individual from God by a corresponding degree. This results in bringing him to a certain degree of concealment away from God's light, causing his presence to be correspondingly hidden. As a result of that concealment, a degree of deficiency becomes an integral part of that individual. So this is just a kind of a restating of the idea that he's talked about before, that Hashem, His light, His power, His energy is pervasive. He doesn't conceal Himself, really. The blindness comes on part of the individual. At the beginning, when Adam and Eve were placed in this Garden of Eden state before they fell, the concealment, their inability to conceive Hashem at certain levels and in certain ways, was placed there by God for a purpose. And that purpose was for them to perfect themselves, to elevate creation, and to have a relationship with Hashem in an elevated and more, actually to become more aware to a greater state of existence after they'd done what they were meant to do. And that would make them worthy vessels to receive Hashem's good in this state of Olam Haba, this world to come. Well, obviously they didn't fulfill that function, but we still have this capacity. Now it's just a more difficult task. So the concealment that was originally there, brought about by Hashem, now was Hashem mankind through his actions causes further concealment just through in the Garden of Eden. So being this fallen state, this concealment, this hiddenness, this darkness, this coarseness, this inability to perceive God, the disconnect from spiritual, that was brought about by mankind. It can be overcome, but it's going to be a difficult process. But the point is the state that you find yourself in is a kind of to do with your actions. So if Hashem, you have to make yourself into a worthy vessel. Sometimes that means repairing the vessel so it can hold God's light or even perceive God's light, and almost like cleaning a mirror or, gluing together a broken glass. So some of the actions in the Torah are to do that, to repair our vessel, our physical body, to be able to perceive Hashem, to remove some of this coarse darkness, to make ourselves more spiritually minded. It's literally the idea of taking this physical world and transforming it into its spiritual components. I don't know if any of you have ever built a radio kit from Radio Shack, but I built a transistor radio. So it's kind of like you open up the box and there's all these components and you have to put them together to get it to work and become a receptor so you can receive a signal. And that's when I read this is kind of the process that I envision, that you take these various components and you put them together in the way that they're intended, and you'll get a pretty amazing result. Hashem's light is always there, and our ability to be recipients of this light, to perceive this light, is due to the actions. And so again, I kind of saying it again and again, but the Torah, every aspect of this Torah is not only to bring us out of our complacency, but to repair certain aspects of ourselves, of creation, of the world around us, so that we can be recipients of this good. In this broken, corrupt state, we aren't able to be recipients of that because of the damage kind of we inherited from in this world through Adam and Eve's cause. So you can see from Adam and Eve down that there was that this corruption, this contamination, this concealment has increasingly grown and grown and grown. So over time, it's manifested in a way that now, in the Garden of Eden, before they fell, they're having this open relationship with Hashem. They're directly conversing with the Creator. There doesn't seem that much of a barrier. After that, they still have this they're still conversing with Hashem in a pretty open way, and you get the knowledge from Seth, and this knowledge that's passed down, and they still because this corruption is present but hasn't compounded, like compounding interest through generation after generation. Getting down to our time, though, you can see that this knowledge of Hashem, this ability to connect to Hashem, becomes less and less and less. And this idea of corruption that was introduced into the system compounds there has to be something to counter it. Otherwise, it continues to grow and grow and grow. And then it becomes a negative cycle, that the more that people conceal Hashem's presence in their own life or in the world, then the less you have, the less likely you are to be able to perceive Hashem's light to move you to repair that darkness. So it grows and it grows and it grows. So finishing 11 here on page 73. We therefore see that the true purpose of the commandments is to turn us toward God, bring ourselves near to Him, and thus be enlightened by His presence, to avoid sin and other phenomena that lead us away from God. This is the true purpose of all the commandments. The particular details of the commandments, however, have extremely deep significance with relation to the details of both man and creation in general, and this will be discussed in a separate section.
There was a question from Diana about marked question in caps. You'll see it.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Paul
stated that each man is given a measure of faith, a reference to the degree of light and corresponding closeness. There's an idea that everything exists in the physical realm has to have at its root a spiritual origin. And this idea is encompassed in the idea of this light. There are components of Hashem that's within everything, otherwise it wouldn't exist. And so there are aspects of Hashem's light hidden in the physical world. The physical world obscures the spiritual. He says that we really don't have any real perception of the spiritual realm around us because of the physicality that we're imprisoned in due to Adam and Eve's sin. But that spiritual component, the light of Hashem, whatever you call it at that point, is all present in everything. It has to be. That's how it is sustained. It's fed, it's nurtured, and brought into reality. And whether you obscure that light even more, or you kind of clean your windshield and bring in more light, depends on your actions and how you relate to the world, to Hashem, and to other people. Any other comments? You're welcome to get on the mic too, please. One moment.
I'm going to put my dog right on the microphone here just to embarrass him. Do you want to talk to everybody? Do you have something to say? Oh, now you're all quiet. Yeah. Pause for a second for a cookie bathroom break, and pause to think of any thoughts, comments, or questions on this section that we just went through. Maybe flip back in the pages, which you can access on the Derech Hashem Facebook page, or if you have the book. But we're coming to an end of 1.4 here, right? And then we're going to get into some weird stuff, and then 1.5 if you've seen the title of the chapter. So moving forward step at a time. There's lots more stuff that's going to come back around involving all these things. It just has to come at the right time. So again, it's all, building a step at a time without getting too far ahead or going off on too many tangents. So let's have a bathroom/water, feed the dogs, cookie break, whatever, and we'll just chat for a minute. Hey, you want me to play that song again now that we have all these people in the room? No? She doesn't want me to play that song. No.
I just want the dogs to stop whining.
Oh, not with this lightning outside.
I know. So sorry. I really like Rebecca's statement there. I'm going to read it for the group. It says, spiritual origin equals purpose. Any program without a purpose gets deleted.
I never heard that before.
Well, no, that's the point. And there are so many commentaries that say that when Israel or when mankind fails to fulfill its purpose, then it kind of puts itself on deletion. I really do encourage people. I'm really drawn to get into some of these deeper concepts, but I don't feel that I would do them justice in the way that Rabbi Kessin or other people do. So I've linked a few things on the Derech Hashem page, but also I'll link to Rabbi Kessin's shiurs that that are in line with these sections that we're talking about. He does an excellent job talking about the fear of Hashem and then the love of Hashem and what does that mean and how does it manifest. But it does get you to this point that you are made for a purpose, and the opposite is if you're here for a purpose, what happens when you don't fulfill that purpose? Good point, Rebecca. Thank you.
I think also, if I can interject, because it's just I've seen it like this, Valerie. Hi. So, going off of Rebecca's or Diana's question too, I think we're all born with a certain, amount, a little teeny weeny bit of spark, of light, and all that. It's our job to seek, and the more we seek and love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, prayer, study of Torah and mitzvah, the bigger our vessels get, the more it can hold. So, that goes back to what, was it Paul that was mentioned, that, it's our job to just seek and continue to seek, and he reveals the hidden. And one of the things I also read this week was that it says that the Torah has 600,000 letters. But if you would sit down, meaning 600,000 souls that correspond with the children of Israel, And if you actually count them, it only comes up to like, I'm making this figure up, 243,000. In other words, it's short, or 300 some thousand, it falls short. But if you count the spaces in between, they are considered a letter, which kind of verifies then the hidden messages that are behind the words themselves. And the only ones that normally, we're starting to see some of those hidden messages, here in our groups, because we continually seek and do. That's all.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, Tovia posted, it said Mashiach will come to explain the spaces. He's trying to defend his source. No, I'm kidding, guys. Yeah, like I said, I get a sense after reading this, like, I think that the danger is for most of us is not to fall. I think King Solomon is a great example of this complacency that you can fall into, and the great damage that it does to the soul and to the world. He got into this. Trying to think of which one it is. It's not the Tavanot. Which one is it? So the Ramchal also writes a book called The Path of the Just. And so he kind of expounds upon some of these ideas. And he talks about literally the first section he says is man's duty in this world. What is the duty of man in this world? And he kind of introduces this idea here in Derech Hashem, but the first of man's duty in this world is, the first one is watchfulness and division, being watchful, being mindful. And one of the things in my line of work I learned a lot about was this Eastern idea of mindfulness, which is something I never really understood or had encountered. And I stated before, like, Judaism is an Eastern religion, and a lot of, like, Buddhism has this concept of mindfulness, but so does Judaism. And the idea is that this kavana, this intent behind everything, understanding and connecting to the intent of why you do what you do, being mindful of when you do something to do it with a specific purpose in mind. So like not sitting, you sit down and you're watching TV and you have a giant bowl of popcorn and you look and 5 minutes later the whole bowl's gone because you kind of got distracted from the process of eating, and you kind of became like an automaton and started just mindfully eating while you were paying attention to something else. So this idea of watchfulness of kavana is integral to of doing these commandments, of following and keeping these commandments and integrating them into your life. It's not just a mindless action, though sometimes you may not understand why you're doing what you're doing, and you're still commanded to do it anyway. And this is when you get into these 7 levels of service, like knowing and trusting that what you're doing was given to you by Hashem. But but to do these things mindfully, you may not understand the why, but you can be very careful as to the how you do them. So when you sit down, being careful what you're eating, that you're doing it for the service of Hashem. And Judaism has instituted various ways to be mindful, to be turning every action from the moment you get up in the morning to the time when you go down to bed at night, through the various commandments and practices and how these are implemented in day-to-day living. It's this idea of mindfulness, guarding and being watchful over all of the actions that we do every day. So you don't get into the state of just mindlessly, not really purposely doing things. And again, we have this nefesh, this animalistic aspect of ourselves that is always present for danger. We know when we see danger that we're going to flee from it. So a lot of the ways that evil manifests in the world is not necessarily in this, horrible, evil way, though sometimes it does happen that way. But most of us would flee. But gradual evil starting a little bit here and a little bit there, conceding a little bit, like Solomon did. One wife who's a pagan idolater. He's a great guy. He can do it. But afterwards he gets sucked into this really. He gets drawn away from serving Hashem in a holy way, because a little bit here and a little bit there, never does evil truly come in and flood and overtake everything, we would be able to see it right away. And we would like, no, that's not good. We're going to flee the opposite direction and look for safety. So this idea of complacency, of a little bit here and a little bit there, is a really important idea in the service of Hashem, to not allow yourself to get into that state. Yeah, you can see like when evil regimes, very rarely do they go in and they just like do all their evil at once. It's usually a little bit here, or like a crisis. And societies are like this. People are like that, forming a bad habit. I mean, I don't know many people that go from not smoking to a pack a day right away. It's, it increases. And the same thing in our commandments and how we live our life. Constant vigilance, constant mindfulness, constantly doing things with an intent to serve Hashem. It's a very difficult task in this world. And sometimes one of the evil aspects of our world is we don't always get to see what the good that we're doing is actually accomplishing. And we just have to trudge on. And that's where you get to those 7 levels of service, that sometimes you can get these moments of awe where you just see your place in the universe and you understand everything, the trials and tribulations, the good things that have happened to you. They all make sense. They're all just, yeah. And then 5 minutes later, you're like, why was I even born? And that's why I like the movies like Ushpizim, because not many of us stay at those elevated states of interconnectedness for very long. It's a difficult process. It's kind of it's called, we're literally doing battle with our Yetzer Hara, and we can lose sight of that intent and that purpose very often. And so the more mitzvot that you keep with the intent to serve Hashem, to draw close to Him, to put together the right, to repair yourself, to make yourself able to receive and perceive, that you can see a gradual repair process. You can see a gradual growth. Sometimes you won't see any results at all, but that's the curse of this world, in effect. Yeah. Do we have any questions or comments on this section specifically? I'm so sorry for the dogs in the background.
We had a question we've been talking about on chat. So, you were talking about being hot and lukewarm and cold and all that. Does that have any correlation at all with the Zedic, intermediate, and the wicked? Because most of us are intermediate. And so then would that mean we're just lukewarm?
Oh, I would not say that at all. It's not where your level of understanding or where your learning is. It's your intent.
Yeah, I got something on that.
Oh, yeah.
I saw this great image once. It was a picture of a wall with a ladder, 2 ladders going from the bottom to the top, and there was a man on one ladder and a man on the other ladder. And the question was, and one man was like a rung or 2 above the other. So the question was, well, which man's going to get to the top first? So everyone picked the man that was up higher. But then the next question was posed, well, do you know which direction they're heading? So going back to what you were just saying, it's not a status thing like Valerie was saying, but more, which way are you heading? What are you doing right now in terms of the lukewarmness and all of that? So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I've been to. I've seen people kind of go on automatic when they're praying, like going through the. Not saying I can understand everyone's intent, but you kind of see. I've seen some people go on automatic in prayer. They're just reciting the words, and you can kind of see by how they're engaging that. I think they're probably wondering if the iron is on at home. You know what I mean? Whereas I've been very privileged at times to be involved in a Jewish day camp, and and see these little children. I mean, they have 5 mitzvot that they know how to do. Like, they wash their hands and they know how to say Shema. But they do it with everything in their heart. They're just completely 100% going all in. And, obviously they don't have the learning and the understanding that the adult who can read the entire Torah and memorize all these Psalms and praise every day. But your actions and your knowledge aren't what's being judged. It's your intent and where you are. The idea of of Hashem's judgment, and the wrong call gets into this later on in the book, is that he takes every aspect of the individual, the time that you live in, the location, your parents, your friends, everything is taken into account, even the influences that we can't even understand or comprehend. And so we're not judged as, we're not going to be judged according to like some great Zadik. We're being judged by who we are and where we're placed in the world. And he kind of gets into this actually in the next section, and kind of expands upon this idea that when he gets into the spiritual realm, that there are aspects to reality, there are aspects to ourselves that we don't even know, we can't even see, we only know they exist because Hashem revealed them to us, and we don't even understand what that truly means. I don't know if you've ever seen this movie Cloud Atlas, Cloud Atlas, where you have these very primitive people coming, encountering like advanced, Star Trek type technology. There's like a craft that hovers over the water, in the air, and they ask, how does your craft float in the air? And she said, fusion engines. And everyone's like, yeah, fusion engines. Nobody knew. They didn't even have they were barely beyond building a hut and starting fire, and they had no comprehension at all what fusion engine means. Like, you can't even think of all the knowledge that would go into that type of concept and idea. They didn't even know what they didn't know. So that's kind of this idea that we get into here, is with this disconnect from the spiritual world, we need a guide. We need someone to show us, one, reveal what we're working towards, two, give us the tools and the knowledge that we need to be able to do and repair things, and three, give us an idea of the how, and the why, and we kind of get glimpses of that in the Torah, and the spiritual aspects that we've been blinded to, that we can't perceive anymore. So that's the importance of this instruction that we get, and like I said, we're being judged. I think someone, you're going to be judged very differently in your commandments and how you keep the commandments and approach God, depending on what time, where you were born, what your parents are, the amount of knowledge, the amount of information you had access to, the components of your personality, your specific challenges. All of those things are taken into consideration. So sorry, I went off a long tangent there.
I love how you said about prayer and just doing it robotically, or whatever word you use. I just had a class Thursday night with Rabbi Siegel. We were talking about Rosh Hashanah, and a lot of prayers are done, they're almost in a mourning state, and it actually should be in a joyous state because it's the coronation of Hashem. And there are those who do, they cry and cry, but they do it out of joy. And it reminds me of all the times I've said Shema and just couldn't even get it out because I was in tears. And we were talking about the awe of God tonight. And, the Shema just really seems to be the biggie that makes you cry even out of joy.
Well, if you peek ahead to the ending in the books like I like to, Shema is the mechanism for ultimate tikkun. And it is the ultimate tool of repair of this world. And
okay, that explains that then. Yeah, I never knew that. Yeah, I cry all the time with Shema.
I know you're skipping a lot if you have the book. If not, we can try and get you access to it. But there's a whole section in his book, Derech Hashem, that deals specifically just with the Shema.
I have it. Guess where I'm going this week.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's like the super tool of the spiritual world that we have access to here. A prime example, getting back to the fear of Hashem and its importance, the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, is this example of two individuals who have achieved a high level of a closeness to Hashem. And in this moment, they're kind of switching roles. So Avram is known for his expansive love. He just wants everybody to be included. He makes converts wherever he goes. He can't say no to his wife Sarah when she tells him to go have a kid with her handmaid. He's all love, expansiveness kind of individual. And then you get Isaac, who never leaves the land, who marries who he's told, who lives this very very strict life compared to his father. So at the binding, you have, what is he, 137 years old or so by the time he gets to the Akedah, and he takes his adult son, who could very easily overpower him, and he gets a command from Hashem to use it to kill him, to sacrifice him. And so you have this kind of switching of a roles for a moment, where Abraham is taking on the strict aspect of God's giving him a command. This is what you need to do. That's very strict. There's not a lot of interpretation in that. You're going to take your son, you're going to sacrifice him. Isaac also has a choice in this moment, and this is a huge thing. One, for Abraham, because Hashem was very clear that Isaac was the son of the promise, that everything he had been building was going to be handed down to Isaac. So all the revelation he received from Hashem, the converts he made, his, what he was doing here was going to end if he kills his son. And so that takes a great deal of annihilation of your own desires, your own will, your own wants, your own needs, and literally sacrificing them on the altar to serve Hashem without any question, without any regard. No buts, no what ifs, nothing. So in the form of Isaac he is the form of strictness. He is like what you would consider more like the awe of Hashem, the strict interpretation of fear. And he is able to subvert his will completely at that moment and not overtake his father and try and save his life. And he basically counteracts every human inclination of self-preservation and allows himself to be a sacrifice at that moment. And we know ultimately the ending of the story is Hashem intervenes, but you can see this physical, this idea of love and fear of Hashem being played out in a very, very powerful way. Oh, nice. Thank you. And it's like this, living out the story of the love and fear right before our eyes. Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, my book list has become a book list in and of itself. Very true. Very, very true. Okay. If we want, we can stop, or we can continue a little bit more if you wanted to go start in the spiritual realm.
I posted the link to Chabad's online Tanya, and that's just spiritual teachings, so keep it simple. And that chapter addresses the idea of the lower and higher fear and the lower and higher love, and a little bit. So that's just another resource there. I'll put it in the group too online, but I just posted the link there.
Thank you.
But I will post it in the group so you don't have to worry about it right now, unless you want to worry about it. We should probably look at chapter or next section 5 a little bit, set the tone for next week.
Can you get the other little barky dog?
She has a name,
She's trying to take out the thunder.
Yeah.
Okay, I can read a little bit. Do you have page 70? Oh, do you want to put page 75 up? Tovi? Do you want to put page 75 up? Page 75? I think we got pictures up to 75 or 76. 77. One moment. I'll start reading. We'll post it. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll do that. So 75, starting section 1.5.1. Creation in general consists of two basic parts, the physical and the spiritual. The physical is that which we experience with our senses, and this in turn is divided into the terrestrial and celestial. The celestial includes such heavenly bodies as the stars and their planets. The terrestrial includes everything in the lowest sphere of the earth, water and atmosphere, and everything detectable, and every detectable thing they contain. The spiritual consists of all entities which are not physical and which in turn cannot be detected by physical means. These, in turn, are divided into two categories, souls and transcendental beings. Souls comprise a class of spiritual entities created to be put into physical bodies, to be joined and strongly bound to those bodies, acting upon them in order to perform various functions and in them. In order to perform various functions in them at different times. Transcendental beings comprise a class of spiritual entities that are not created to be put into physical bodies. These, in turn, are divided into two categories. The first category consists of forces, and the second of angels. These transcendental beings also exist on different levels, each type having its own laws and distinct nature, depending on the level and place in the general scheme. So great is the variation between different angel types that each group can be considered a different species in a general class. This class is the angelic. So, he's talking about obviously the division between the physical and spiritual worlds, and then kind of getting into the ideas that there's, just as there are different classes that inhabit the physical realm, you got, single-celled organisms all the way up to man, that there are various organisms, entities, beings that inhabit the spiritual realm as well. And just as we have a multitude of diversity on our planet here, there is a diversity of species in the spiritual realm as well. So Aravdas is asking, what's the image of Baal and in peace and the wooden image of Asherah? Well, this connects to the idea of, I don't know if he's getting into it here. Kind of gets into it at one point too, but as we stated, anything that comes into existence has to originate from a spiritual nothingness world. It ultimately comes from nothing, from Hashem, and manifests into what we perceive as to be the physical realm. So the idea is that every physical entity, every planet, every star, for these mechanisms to exist, they have to have a spiritual infrastructure supporting and causing them to come into reality. Like the program on a computer that, the programming, the code that manifests on your computer as a program that you can interact with. Most people wouldn't be able to read and interact with the code and utilize it at that level. But when they have this overlay, this graphic user interface over a computer program, we can interact with it much easier. I don't know if anybody remembers the life of DOS and all the DOS prompts to get things going. But anyway, it's kind of like the physical is overlaid over the spiritual reality. Right now, because we're kind of trapped and prisoners in the physical world, we don't understand the spiritual concepts behind them. But there are spiritual concepts, spiritual entities, a spiritual connectivity to everything we use, which is why the Torah has to be a very inclusive set of commandments, and how we engage in the physical realm has a spiritual component and impact. And that's where the idea of avodah zarah, of idolatry, comes from, trying to manipulate these spiritual forces through the physical world, through idolatry, through various sacrifices or practices to try and to engage with the spiritual aspects behind these physical components apart from Hashem's intended system. It's computer programs were never intended to bring down countries or servers or to cause harm, but there are entities, people that can come and create a program that can cause a lot of harm. Most of the programs we utilize are for good. They serve a purpose, and it's a good purpose, but there are some of these programs that are nefarious and cause harm and can do great damage. So the idea is that you can utilize these forces for good, meaning service of Hashem, or for evil, meaning for your own control, your own purposes, and use them apart from Hashem's desired intent. Was DOS invented before, after, or before fire? Ha. Valerie still uses DOS? My condolences. So, in regards to the spiritual world, we have the physical world, but ultimately it overlies the spiritual component, the physical realm does. And he gets into the angels. He says they exist, and their reality we can't quite understand because we don't have any perception of what that means. But they're there, and we need to know they're there. Do we have page 77, Toby? Okay, beautiful. Thank you. 77. There is, however, another class that is an intermediate between the spiritual and physical. This consists of entities that cannot be detected by physical means and are not bound by the limitation and laws of ordinary detectable matter. For this reason, they might improperly be considered spiritual. Their essence, however, is very different than that of the angelic class, even though they may resemble them in some ways. These entities also have specific attributes and unique limitations based on their true nature. They are therefore considered a separate class, namely the demons. This class also contains certain individual types, where each type may be considered a separate species belonging to the general class of demon. So the Rambam doesn't believe this exists. He disagrees with this concept of this demonic realm that kind of incorporates, they're not spiritual. They're just physical enough to exist in our realm, but they're so spiritual that we can't comprehend their presence or perceive them per se. But they do have an impact and effect. And there's some in Rashi that says there are more of them than there are of us. And it's if we saw how many there were, we would be overwhelmed by their presence. So it's an odd way to look at it, but if you look in the classification of species, they have these bridge species that they're kind of one thing and they're kind of another. And my favorite one is the platypus. It's a mammal, kind of. Well, it has mammary glands, but it kind of comes out through the hair follicles. They don't have any specific teats on the female. She kind of just sweats milk. And the males have a component of reptilian. They have a spur that is very reptilian in nature. And they look like they were put together by, they kind of look like they have a beaver's tail and a duck's bill. But sorry. And you have like a bridge. What? They don't have they have claws. Anyway, so that like you can see these animals existing, they're kind of one thing, they're kind of another. Bridges. The idea of these demonic classes that they're not, you don't want to say that they're like mankind is unique, but they have an effect in their own spiritual, they're in their own species per se. See here. So going on, of all the things that exist, however, only man alone consists of two absolute opposites, namely a spiritual soul and a physical body. Nothing else in all of creation shares this quality. One must be careful not to erroneously consider that other animals are the same as man in this respect. Although animals do have a soul, it is not a spiritual entity. Although an animal's soul may be almost ethereal, it may be the most ethereal of all physical entities, it still does not enter the realm of the spiritual. Man is also a living creature and therefore has a similar animal soul. Besides this animal soul, however, man also has a higher soul. This higher godly soul is a separate entity, completely different from the body and far removed from the physical. Only by virtue of God's decree is the higher soul able to reside in a man's physical body for the purpose outlined in the previous chapters. So there's a midrash that says that when Adam was created, the angels got confused and started to worship Adam because of his soul being so infused with Hashem's light that he almost, like Hashem said, let us make man in our image. And he did. He made this spiritual component that is attached at a very high level, and that means that it receives a great amount of Hashem's sustenance, nurture, light, power, energy. But we have been, unlike these demonic class that is kind of a mixture of the two. They're a little bit spiritual, they're a little bit physical. They kind of are this, they're not really comprised of both. They're kind of some of this and some of that. Mankind is completely fire and water combined into a new being and a new entity. And that's only through Hashem's ability to take these opposite components and combine them into a new entity. And man is unique in that form. So while these demonic class can interact in the physical and somewhat in the spiritual, mankind is the only one that has the ability to interact completely and engage at both levels. Even the angels can't do that. The idea is that when the angels are manifesting in a physical form, it's almost, it was a kind of a difficult midrash, but it's basically the rabbi seemed to be saying that they take on a suit, they take like on gloves, like a hand filling a glove, it fills into a physical realm. So that even when they look physical and they're able to interact in our world, they're not truly physical. It's kind of an astronaut going into space. It's not their true realm. It says the reason, he said he already built the case of why man has to be a spiritual and physical component. And this high lofty soul, the soul that is connected to Hashem at a very high level, is what compels us towards the spiritual. And this nefesh is the bridge to the physical world and our physical involvement. And it's through all these levels of the soul that mankind is this entity that lives in all these worlds all at once. Okay, any comments?
There was questions on the relationship, if any, between demons, shadim, and the idea of klipot. And in terms of is a demon considered some type of klipot or something like that? Maybe defining the terms a little bit here and explaining how, if at all, there's any interaction.
I have to say that I don't have the knowledge to answer that per se, but one of the idea of sustenance. So we understand sustenance in the physical realm. I mean, you something grows, you utilize that, you cook it, you eat it, you take it in. So the idea of what sustains, there's sustenance in the spiritual realm, that these entities are created, they're being sustained. The question is, through what mechanism are these various entities being sustained by Hashem? In our world, our sustenance comes through the physical realm, through planting, growing, hard labor, toil, planning to get the food, or you go and buy it on a supermarket shelf. But the point is, we understand how we get our sustenance in the physical world. In the spiritual world, do the angels have food? How does Hashem sustain the angelic realm? How does Hashem sustain this demonic realm? How are these spiritual entities sustained, and what is the mechanism they're sustained through? And so in the regard to this demonic realm, that they are sustained off of, and this is, like I said, it's a spiritual concept. I really can't give you a lot of detailed explanation, but they're sustained through improper actions in this world. So one of the graphic ones is Hashem pretty clear about procreation, and when man utilizes those forces to not procreate but just to fulfill his own desires, and there is an emission from that, then that is an idea that is sustaining and creating this demonic realm. And again, this points to the fact that we are physical creatures, blinded to our spiritual selves and blinded to the spiritual realm. So we wouldn't necessarily perceive this action. It seems in the physical world, it's really not harming anybody, and it's really not doing anything, because the world doesn't end. Nobody goes blind, and you know what I mean? But something does happen in the spiritual realm, which is why the Torah has commandments, a way to handle yourself and your sexual energy in a holy, in a way that was prescribed by Hashem, to take this very powerful force and use it in His service. And the same is true for a lot of the actions. It's kind of actions of thought and intent and purpose, and using this energy, this spiritual energy, and not every action is said to have a spiritual effect. The words we say affect the people around us. Even things we do in secret have some kind of a spiritual effect, because we have that much power. A long time ago, I alluded to the fact that mankind, because of his components being physical and spiritual, is the most powerful creature in creation apart from Hashem. And the ability to affect both worlds is completely 100% there. And so a lot of the mitzvot have not necessarily anything to do with something that makes sense, like the ritual purity, like when a woman gives birth, she's unclean. Well, what is unclean? And what does that concept stem from? And what are the ashes of the red heifer? All these concepts touch on the fact that there's a spiritual component to reality that we may not necessarily understand, may not be revealed to us, but we still have to be able to manage and have a positive effect on. And so these commandments exist. Anyway, any other questions? And getting back to the klipot, I don't have enough information or knowledge to be able to answer that at all very well. So what is a klipot? So this idea of a shell or a husk. And it's not that there are literal shells or husks. The idea is that you have to have some kind of way to conceptualize this, the effects of the sins of Adam and Eve, this corruption that's kind of invaded the reality, the physicality of the world. And so the idea is there's this corruption that's created a impenetrable barrier that it can obscure the light, like a bowl over a candle. The other way, it's like a nut or shell of a fruit, skin of a fruit. So it's something that obscures something good. And at the beginning, in the creation of the world, this was a necessary component of creation. There had to be a way for Hashem to conceal his presence for something else to exist, a sense of otherness, creation, man, angels, anything. There has to be a sense of withholding and covering, concealing, like in the idea of modesty, where you're covering certain aspects of yourself. And this is a holy component that was introduced for us to exist. But with mankind sinning, he took this holy component, and the best way I can say is he took this perfected world for man to exist in and caused it, literally the word used is prolapse. It fell out of this holy state and became, the words of the wrong call used as our dark course. It blinded us. And this is the idea of these klipot, that they are able to trap holy energy and obscure it from and separate it from creation. Things, acts that come between us and God, like an invisible force field. Yeah, kind of. It's that idea, and this also not necessarily. I'll have to find the posting. I posted something in the thread on Facebook to Inner Space, and it was an article on the Shekinah, this divine presence, and it's this idea of like all the pieces of creation are been shattered and buried, and you kind of have to go mining in a spiritual way to uncover them and to find them. And spiritual mining. This is just an analogy I use, but this is what the mitzvot are. These are what the commandments are. Not as necessarily everything that's obscured is caused by our sin. Some of it actually goes all the way back to the original sin of Adam and Eve. So we can be addressing all, our actions can't only just affect our life, but all the way back to Adam and Eve. And this is an important concept that'll come up again. But because these forces exist, we can, like you said, we can create an even greater force to obscure our ability to understand and perceive God, or we can kind of lessen that force, that obscuring aspect of our own soul and in creation. So it says, there's a point here, though. Here's a point. One may or may not know the Creator, although the Creator always knows each and every second moment in things, humans, etc. So actually, there is no comes in between. Well, the Ram Call says there is something that can come between you and Hashem's sustaining light. His light is you, yourself. You can, because Hashem's light is always accessible. The question is, do you have a container? Are you a container or a receptacle that's able to receive that light? And the idea is that per our actions, we can repair ourselves and be able to be recipients of this light, or we can cause further damage to ourselves and have even less ability to receive Hashem's goodness than we had before. So really, this is a constant flow of energy. Any blocking, any obscuring of that is through man's actions. And that started with Adam and Eve and their actions, and it compounds and compounds every generation, and unless there's something to intervene and cause that to stop. And you see there are people, there are mechanisms in the system that are a lot that can correct that compounding of this darkness in creation. And you have like the idea of a righteous individual that can be connected to God and reveal truth and understanding and insight and teach. Or you have the components like the sacrificial system that was introduced through the Mishkan, and then you have the temple. Even their mechanisms and how they interact with the people around them. So that can bring repair or damage. And so it's the actions of man that cause the light of Hashem to be obscured or to be increased, because we're the power company for the world, kind of. If we're the ones that either cut off the flow or keep it going, individually for ourselves and our own soul, but also for the world. So, and he again will go against the Rambam in a couple. The Ramchal and Maimonides don't agree on some things, and the big one is a couple of big ones. Minor of the demonic realm, but the other big one is that Rambam says that no, the physicality of man ends in the Olam Haba, and the Ramchal states many times, and he has some good sources to back this idea up, is that no, the physicality continues to exist even in the world to come. So, what did Yeshua mean by no man can pluck you from God's hand? So this is kind of jumping ahead to some really deep concepts, but there's this idea of divine providence in the world, that mankind, as powerful as he is absolutely nothing. Nothing. We're nothing. Hashem is the master of the world, and he has his intent and his design and his plan. And this has come up a lot in Inner Space, and Arya Kaplan uses it, this idea of a grand master playing me or somebody, like a first grader who just learned chess. The obvious thing is the grand master is always going to have control of the board, irrespective of the view of this first grader who may think at one time or another they're getting the upper hand. The idea is this overriding system that is always in control. So irrespective of man's actions in this world, Hashem is the Lord, he's the master, he is the creator, he is the originator of all things. So nothing we do will ever circumvent Hashem's plan in this world. So because Hashem is interacting with this world, there's the Control-Alt-Delete option, to use computer terminology. That wouldn't be very good. So apart from this, resetting everything, which is ultimately what will happen. The Ramchal says that ultimately everything in the physicality of this world is going to be reset. It's going to be broken down and brought back up. But there are the mechanisms that Hashem uses to affect this world, to interject his will. And this idea of choice and free choice, I hate to use this as an illusion because it's not. We have choice, but the effects of that choice will never circumvent Hashem's plans. That's the verse the mainstream uses, say once save, always save. Well, there's a teaching, as evil as Esau was, that he makes it into the world to come, but in a diminished state. And there's an idea coming later on that people in the world to come, not everybody are at the same level. We don't all get the same benefits because we don't all act the same, nor do we do the same things. We don't all face the same challenges in this world. We don't all succeed. Sometimes we fail. And so there's an idea that your level of attachment to Hashem is directly related to the actions that you did in this world. So this world is it's an oddity. We talked about this idea of judgment, that judgment is the strict justice that is part of and integral to the formation of our world. Is an entity that wanted to absolutely take control of everything, because at the time that Adam and Eve sinned, by very rights, their very existence should have been blotted out. But the first action of creation is chesed. It's a loving action based on absolutely nothing based on nothing that needs to exist. It has no reason to exist on its own right. It has no merits that cause it to continue to exist. So Hashem has the ability to intercede at various aspects out of pure chesed. So apart from letting judgment come and destroy everything, Hashem intervened in loving kindness and kind of, instead of destroying Adam and Eve, kind of knocked them down to a different level. He kicks them out of the Garden of Eden to protect them from annihilating themselves. And so the consequences of that for mankind is we live in this diminished state. It wasn't done out of retribution. It was done out of a sense of protection, because now they have this corruption that cannot exist at the level that they're interacting at. And if they continue to try and dwell at that level, then they would be annihilated by the very fact they're corrupt beings. And no corruption, this darkness, is the opposite of Hashem. And we said when something is in the spiritual world close, then it has to be like Hashem. And with this corruption that is introduced into their being, they're almost completely opposite of Hashem and should have been annihilated immediately. But because of the loving mercy of Hashem, he gives mechanisms in this world to correct that and to regain a relationship and to repair the damage that was done. So, because of this diminished aspect now, we live in this world of disconnect, and this world is, I'm trying to put it in ways that don't sound too, I'm trying to do it justice, a lot of things, but there's an idea that we live in this world of grace, of chesed, loving mercy, that because Hashem intervenes in a loving way, doesn't allow us to be completely annihilated, we're kind of sustained by this entity of just pure chesed. Ultimately, we still have the ability to do the work that Adam and Eve were called to do, and that is to gain perfection, to become masters of our Yetzer Hara, to become entities that bring repair and restoration and elevation, to become a receptacle of Hashem's goodness. But really, mankind is just existing on the pure grace of Hashem, keeping back the forces of judgment that should, by all rights, annihilate each one of us. So, sorry, I'm a little distracted by the crying puppy. So what happens is, because we live in this world of pure mercy and judgment is held at bay, we live in this system of, what's the word I'm looking for? We live in this fallen state where mankind was never meant to just live off the kindness of Hashem. We've talked about it kind of briefly in the past, this bread of shame, that mankind has this integral aspect of wanting to serve and connect, to earn. And this is the component that was placed in by God in the neshama, to compel man to do spiritual activities. Just like the nefesh is compelled to do physical activities, this neshama has this aspect of wanting to serve, of wanting to perfect, of wanting to become worthy. And in this world, in this fallen state, that's kind of been circumvented. We still have that opportunity, but really all of mankind for this present time is allowed to be sustained in this fallen state, which means that those people who have attachment to God, who are serving God, can continue to serve God. But it also means that this corruption and contamination, and those people who bring about further contamination, further corruption, are also allowed to do what they're doing. And so we kind of are sustained together by the same power that brings creation into existence at all point. So in reality, Hashem's holy light, his holy energy, is being used for good and evil. And the true miracle of the world is that we aren't annihilated completely. But the point of the matter is eventually, in this world, that there has to be a rejoining of it in a holy way. And one of the aspects of that judgment coming to being is death for man, and breaking down of the physical aspects, and a time of purification and restoration for the soul of man in this spiritual world, until they can be rejoined again in the resurrected state of this new body that we'll receive. So, sorry, again, long bunny trail. Any other questions, comments, observations. Thank you for sticking around with the silly dogs. Yeah, I love bunny trails too. It's Tovia saying, what is a tabernacle? What? Yeah, the Mishkan. Let's see. Mishkan. Like, its building and its function is brought in the Torah, but it was this traveling tent where Israel would meet to serve Hashem through sacrifices and various offerings. It was designed very specifically, and its components are the tabernacle itself, its courtyard, various altars, which are areas where sacrifices were brought, and within the tent itself, there were sectioned areas where only the high priest was allowed to go, and you have something called the menorah, which is this candelabra of 7 branches, and obscured from everyone's view except for the high priest sitting in there would be this the ark, or so if that makes sense. And then later on, when Israel takes the land, the Mishkan is sustained for a while, but eventually a more permanent building is built in Jerusalem, and that's built by Solomon with the outsourcing to the king of Tyre. Yeah, exactly. It was designed according to the symbolism of what's in heaven. It's a microcosm of creation. So every aspect and every function of the tabernacle was meant to be kind of like a living picture and story of creation in Hashem. Yeah, Valerie brought up a really good point about your brain can be your enemy. This is where the realm of this idea of mindfulness comes in. And when I was introduced to it, I became very excited because it kind of illuminated a whole aspect of Jewish observance that I never really understood before. And just like, if you can hear my dog, animals need training, and sometimes the brain, it can be like a wild animal pacing in a cage, locked up. Mindfulness is this idea of taking your mind and training it to serve a function, training it to work for you and not against you. And that's why this mindfulness observance of every aspect of your life is so important, because it's training your brain to be an entity that works on your behalf in the service of Hashem. My physical reality is I have a neighbor who has a German Shepherd who listens to every command he ever says, who is always attentive and obedient, doesn't need a leash. Even in the pack of dogs, will be sitting quietly next to him. And I have 2 kind of trained animals who whine throughout every teaching and everything we try to do. So that's my physical example of what that means. Yeah, but your Yetzer Hara wants control. It wants to take control, and learning it. Instruct. You can't ignore the fact that we have this inclination towards bad choices, towards selfishness, towards me, towards doing things that are opposite of what Hashem would desire of us. Ignoring it isn't going to make the problem go away. It's training it to become your partner in a way, keeping it at bay. Because we know, like, the German Shepherd has the ability to kill. I mean, it's used as a police animal for a reason. It has all the power, strong jaws. But this animal that has a capacity to do great harm is being trained and utilized to serve its master. And so the Yetzer Hara can be. That's one of the aspects of not ignoring it, but bringing it under management, and actually kind of annihilating its impact on your life through negation of yourself And if you've ever read any of the various teachings of Chassidut, that's what they teach. It's this idea of being able to put aside your selfish desires, your sense of self, your engagement and attachment to materialism, to connect with Hashem in a holy way so that you can utilize the physical world and observe the commandments in a much higher level. And it's something, like I said, it's something I aspire to do. Mindfulness is something that I have a difficulty doing too. I think, Taz said suppression of the Yetzer Hara. I mean, yes and no. I don't know if you've ever tried to, I grew up on a farm and we had cows. And if I ever tried to corner an animal like that, it would take me out. So the idea is, is instead of working against it, the Torah is there to lessen its effect, lessen its ability to draw and pull and have influence over your mind, over your choices, and over your life.
Is that sort of like raising a daughter?
No, the idea is directly confronting it is not necessarily a good thing.
So it's like raising a daughter.
Well, no, it's like, but it has a holy function. Its function's been subverted. And, if you laid in, if you had, someone laying in bed, their muscles start to atrophy. I mean, and gravity and inertia can be a really horrible thing when it works against you. But this is the force that helps us build muscles, that keep us healthy, that we can engage in the world. We can send up rocket ships. But the idea is, if it's a force that can do a lot of evil, but it's also a force that can be, when it's utilized and understood correctly, can bring about a world of good for you as well. And the Yetzer Hara is like this. It's really a destructive force. It can be a really powerful destructive entity in a person's life. But understanding, and this is what the whole purpose of Hashkafa is, this whole idea of what the Rome Call is trying to do, is give an understanding of, instead of, giving you the 613 commandments and just, saying, okay, go out and figure it out. He's kind of building up this idea of why we do what we do, and why and how we do what we do is connected to the why. And so this is the whole purpose of Hashkafa, understanding the components that are at play, why we need a commandment, what the commandments are ultimately meant to do. And that's the whole purpose of Hashkafa, is to motivate you to understand so you're better engaged. Because Hashem said, the Ron Call says Hashem had the ability, if you wanted to, subject his will onto everybody. You don't have a choice. You're going to do A. You don't have a choice between A and B. You're going to do A. But he says that's not the relationship Hashem wants to have. He doesn't want someone serving him out of force. He wants it to be a choice. And that choice is, come, let us reason together. And this idea is using this intellect, which is the component that directly relates to your neshama, using that intellect to understand and engage with Hashem at a higher level than just the animal urges, the fear of being punished, the fear of annihilation, the fear of losing your sense of self. Using these higher components of your mind and your soul to engage and serve Hashem at a high level. And this is the point of Hashkafa.
Can you comment on the tabernacle, the first temple and the second temple, on what's the difference between the three? I made a comment in the room there about, are they upgrades or downgrades, or is that even relevant? What's the difference or similarities between the three? 'Cause there's clearly something going on there.
I mean, I'm not at all versed in all that information. I mean, the first one is pretty holy. It's built by someone who's given direct plans by Hashem, Betzalel, and its design is directly given by Hashem, and the materials, the dimensions, the functions, all of these things were given directly by Hashem. Now, when they get into the land, the Mishkan still is serving a function. Ultimately, and this is commanded by Hashem, Solomon builds a temple, and this temple is accepted because the presence of Hashem fills this temple. But it's a different form. It's a permanent building. It's different dimensions, still serving the same type of function. And then you have that temple being destroyed, where the first temple wasn't destroyed, it was safely secured away somewhere. And then the second temple is built, and it doesn't have the presence of Hashem like the first. So, oh, interesting. Valerie says, Midrash says Moses was not allowed in the land because he would have built the temple and it would have been so holy that it would not have been able to be destroyed, and the Jews would have to be annihilated. Yeah. Well, that's that idea of people look at the expulsion of Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden as being like this angry retribution, when in fact it was a protective measure that you have to have the right equipment to be in a certain place. And if we were pushed out into the void of space without a spacesuit, we would very quickly die. And the same thing is true in the spiritual realm, that you have to have the ability to exist at that level. Kind of like, in our world, you can't live under sea unless you have the physiology to be able to utilize oxygen from water. Otherwise, you'll die. And the same thing is true about Adam and Eve. They kind of, not really, but they kind of became a new species, and they weren't able to exist at that level, and they had to be put into a existence that they could be sustained in. And it definitely wasn't going to be at the level of the Garden of Eden at that point. Yeah. So why do we mourn the destruction of temples when it was really an act of mercy, except we mourn human shortcomings and how terrible it is? Well, the big part is, yes, we kind of, it's more of what brought about this horrible action. But the other part is there's an accessibility, there's a repair that's being done at a very high level now, not just for us, but for the world. And that was lost as well. There's this presence, there's this connectivity that is being cut off. But Ezekiel says that we become the temple. Now we're the temple of Hashem. If you read Ezekiel has, I'll get you the verse here. If I put down my dog, he might start whining again, but I'm going to go find you the verse. Shavua Tov, Diana. Let's see here. Don't cry, Pooey. Sorry, it's my dog. Sorry for the quiet. Tovi should be. Okay, here it is. It's Ezekiel 43:10 and 11. It says, Son of man, describe the temple to the house of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and let them measure the pattern. And if they are ashamed of all that they have done, make known to them the design of the temple and its arrangement, its exits and its entrances, its entire design, and all of its ordinances, all its forms, and all its laws. Write it down in their sight so they may keep its whole design and all its ordinances and perform them. Oh yeah, and Ram Kal has a really amazing. This idea is that now we're kind of in that place of bridging that gap, being that connectivity, which is kind of is a downgrade. But it is a way to, we're definitely given a mechanism to continue to do tikkun, to repair, to connect to God, even with the absence of the temple. And Ezekiel basically points out that we still have that ability. Moses invited the mountain in very presence. Oh, the idea of handling the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah. The spiritually right. Sorry. Interesting thing, if you look at the dimensions of the Mishkan and the dimensions of the Ark, there really should not have been any room. I'm kind of lost the specifics of that, but there is this mystical aspect of this creation of the Mishkan, this tabernacle, and the ark. It has some spiritual aspect, that it has some connectivity to the spiritual realm that supersedes, transcends what we understand to be a physical object made of wood and gold, because it definitely has an effect on the enemies of Israel. Exactly. There's this spiritual, like kind of like the ark that Noach made. The tabernacle has this mystical aspect in its ability. Yeah. But the odd thing about me is having, I think, the odd thing about me, the odd thing I think is, for me, is the fact that it contains it contains the smashed, the tablets that Moshe got angry and smashed, and it kind of speaks to a pretty horrible chapter in Israel's existence, which is what happened at Mount Sinai with the creating of the golden calf, and they've lost this opportunity to bring high spiritual repair, but they still have a way to deal with this aspect of damage that they may have brought and caused, or this opportunity that they lost. Any other questions? Yeah, space restrictions. He's the creator of the fabric of space-time, so I think he can have a little bit of control over that. Yeah. I posted a few things from Aisha's commentary. It's really awesome. Very short articles on what the 6 constant mitzvot are. I'll post the one on the Shekhinah in Derech Hashem. I posted another one on the psychology of fear by Rabbi of Chabad. And I'll post links as well to Rabbi Mendel Kessen's teachings on this part. I think it's 59 through 61. Looking for clarification. So Rav says, a real Ark of the Covenant like Moses got there, all the blessings. Oh, Rav, are you talking about when they received the Torah? I give to you day, life, and death, blessing and a curse. Is that what you're referring to, Rav? No, okay. Okay. So when they're standing on the mountain, the idea is that they'd gotten to this highest level of, like Isaac on the altar, or Abraham willing to sacrifice his entire dynasty and heart and work for 137 years. This idea of taking it no matter what it meant, whatever the implications were, life and death. It's not life or death. It's life and death, the blessing and the curse. So being able to transcend your sense of self and and connect with the higher reality. And that's what, one of the midrash I saw on that concept conveys this higher level of love and fear of Hashem. Okay. Any other questions or comments or bunny trails? Same here, unless someone wants to talk to Rabbi Pubi. Pubi is allowed to say my dog in the background. So
we'll post some stuff in the room tonight, tomorrow. Please post comments, questions, resources yourselves in the room. Keep that going. Last I just looked, there's like 100 people in the group now, over 100 in the Derech Hashem group. So a bunch were added recently. So a lot of people are coming into the middle of it now, so it's a little tricky. So it's good to perhaps try to give them a little help, or put some questions out there and show them where I got all the video links are in the about file. If you go in the group and there's that about file to the left, top left in that section, I got all the videos up to date, and I'll post this one tomorrow, Lord willing. And but direct people to those so they can go back to the beginning if they want. Start on the first one, which is really the second one. We missed the first week, as you recall. Man, that's about all I got.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's been such a blessing. Truly has. Don't be afraid to jump on the mic, come with questions, comments, counter arguments. Anyway, so again, blessing, shalom, everyone, Shavua Tov.